All right, so in this lesson, we're talking about parallel and perpendicular lines. So yes, we do know that parallel lines will never intersect, but as far as algebra goes, that's not going to help us too much. But so parallel lines in algebra, we should know that, first of all, we should know the symbol. That's how the symbol is. And in algebra, parallel lines means same slope. And then we're talking about perpendicular lines also. The symbol for perpendicular lines, it's an upside down T. And for perpendicular lines, we have the slopes that are, we call them negative reciprocals of each other. Negative reciprocals of each other. Some people call them opposite reciprocals, same thing. So common sense is telling us here, again, as far as algebra goes, in order for us to say yes, parallel lines or no parallel lines or whatever the case, we have to examine each equation and check the slope of each line. So let me be specific with some examples. So let's say you're given this line and this line. So they're asking if the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or maybe they don't have any correlation there. So you have to go and check their slopes. Remember, the slope of the equation would be the number in front of the x if the equation is y equals mx plus b. So the slope here is 4. And I'm checking this second line and its slope is -4. Well, 4 is not the same as 4. 4 is not the negative reciprocal of -4. So these lines are not parallel and they're not perpendicular either. Let's go to another example. Y equals 5x plus 2. And I'm comparing that equation to y equals -5x plus 4. Again, I have to compare slopes. So let's see what's going on here. This slope is a 5. And this slope is -1/5. Where 5 is not the same as 1/5, but I need to check if the 5 is the negative reciprocal of the -1/5. So we have to do two things. You have to flip the 5 over 1 and switch the sign. So if you flip 5 over 1 and switch its sign, you will get -1/5. So these two lines are perpendicular and I just have to put the symbol and I'm good to go. Let's go over another example. What about if you have something like this? Y equals 7 and y equals -2. Now we have learned that y equals a number should be a horizontal line. Y equals a number should be another horizontal line. So think about it. Two horizontal lines, they will always be parallel to each other, equal distant. So for this specific case, I really don't have to examine slopes, even though we know that for horizontal lines, the slope of each line would be 0. So yes, they would have the same slope. M equals 0 and M equals 0. Let's move on. Another example. How about if I have this? Y equals x and y equals -x. Slope of the first line is the number in front of the x, which is a 1. Slope of the second line would be -1. So you're comparing 1 to -1. 1 and -1. Are these two negative reciprocals of each other? Yes, they are. If you flip 1 over 1, you're going to get the same thing, but you have to switch the sign. So 1 is a negative reciprocal of -1. Another way to look at negative reciprocals is that their product should always give us -1. So because their product is -1, these two lines are perpendicular to each other. Let's do a couple more here. What about if I have y equals 1/2 x minus 6, and then what about if they give me 2x plus 4y equals 3? Now in the first equation, I can clearly see what the slope is. The slope is 1/2. In the second equation, I don't know what the slope is yet, so I have to take this equation and solve it for y. So I'm doing the process right now. I will take the 2x over, so it's going to be negative 2x. The 3 stays there, so it's still positive. And I have to divide everything by 4. So if I clean that up, I'm just going to write it right here. I should have y equals negative 1/2 x plus 3/4. I'm comparing 1/2 to negative 1/2. They're not the same, but be careful. They're not opposite reciprocals. They're opposites, but they're not opposite reciprocals. So these are two different lines, and they're going to be meeting at some point that is not of interest right now, but they're not parallel or perpendicular. Now, let's go and do some examples where you're going to be asked to come up with an equation of a line. So let's say that they're telling you that you have a y-intercept to be 4, and your line has to be perpendicular to y equals 2x plus 1. So in order for you to build your equation, because they're giving you that a y-intercept is 4, you know that a point on your line would be 0, 4. Because your line is perpendicular to this line, you need to get the slope of this line and flip it and switch its sign, because that's going to be your slope. So if you take 2/1, flip it and switch the sign, in other words, the negative reciprocal of 2 would be negative 1/2. So this is the information you have to start building your line. And because they gave you the y-intercept, you can write it right away. Y equals mx plus b. So y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4. So you can clearly see that 2 and negative 1/2 are negative reciprocals of each other. If you multiply the 2 across, you're going to get negative 1. Okay, what about if you're given a point that your line is passing through, 4, 10, for example, and what about if they tell you that your line is parallel to this line? Now, because your line is parallel to this line, that tells you and me that they're sharing the same slope. So your slope would be exactly the same as this, which means 3. So m equals 3. Here's what I have to start my equation. Now, unlike before, the blue example up here, where I had the b-value, now I don't know the b-value. So I have a point in the slope. So I have to build my equation maybe by using point slope. That would be the easiest. So here's point slope. Oops, m x minus x1. All right, so this is going to be my x1 right here, and this is going to be my y1. So put in your equation x1, y1, and m. So I'm substituting y minus 10 equals m3 x minus 4. You can stop here, but if you really wanted to put in slope-intercept, you know what you're doing right now. You're just distributing. And finally, you want y by itself, so you will get rid of that negative 10 by adding 10. And your answer would be y equals 3x minus 2. So again, if you're comparing what you were already given, y equals 3x plus 8 and 3x minus 2, you can clearly see that yes, indeed, they have the same slope, 3 and 3.